March is the gardener's favourite time of year. It's a month where everything starts springing back into life again. Things are warming up, there's signs of spring everywhere, and it's all systems go now. We're hitting the ground running, getting the garden jobs done, and getting things planted and sown. And speaking of sowing, there are lots of seeds that we can be sowing in the month of March. We've already sown some in January and February, but there are many more of them which we can get sown in March now. And I'm going to go over those seeds in this video, and some of these seeds I'll be sowing as well. So I'll be giving you some tips and advice about growing each seed as well. So we're going to start off the video with one of my favourite crops to grow. I've been waiting to sow these now for quite some time. Some of you may have already sowed them if you've got the room to grow them, and those are tomatoes. I am really excited to start my tomatoes in March. I did sow a couple of them a couple of weeks ago just to see how they get on, but most of my tomatoes will be sown in March because they do grow super fast. Sowing tomatoes in March will give you decent plants around April, May time. I'm going to be growing them in the greenhouses and the polytunnels on my plot, and I'll plant them out around early to mid-May, hopefully. So I've got some varieties here. Cocktail Crush, Sun Gold. A couple of other varieties which I'm growing are Honeymoon, which is a lovely salad tomato, and Sweet Aperitif as well. And those are lovely. They're just the F1 hybrids though. There are loads of different varieties out there. In fact, there are thousands of different varieties of tomato out there, and I would highly recommend growing the heritage types. There are many different colours, shapes, sizes and flavours out there. The problem with these modern day hybrids like these Sun Gold tomatoes, they are very sweet, don't get me wrong, and they are lovely. But because of all this breeding that the modern day varieties have to produce plants that are more vigorous and disease resistant, the flavours of these old heritage varieties has been lost. That classic tomato flavour just isn't there anymore. So with these unusual tomato varieties, these heritage varieties, they are really worth growing because you've got that really unusual flavour that modern day varieties don't have. And they look brilliant as well. They really do add interest to your salads and even your cooking as well. So sow some tomatoes in March and plant them outside or in your greenhouse after your last frost date because they are not frost hardy. Now, I actually sowed these in January because they do take quite a long time to grow. But you can sow them in March as well. It's still early yet and you can still achieve a crop this growing season if you sow them now. And those are peppers. Sweet peppers or chili peppers. Get them sown in March now. At home, like with the tomatoes, because they're not frost hardy and they need warmth to grow. A bright south-facing windowsill, or grow lights if you have them, is ideal. I've got them at home under the grow lights currently, and they're doing pretty well at the moment. They're a good few inches tall now, a long way off being planted in the polytunnel, which is where I'm going to grow them this year, but they're coming along pretty well. Get them sown in March. I've got King of the North, New Ace, and Fiesta, which is a yellow one. The King of the North is said to produce a good crop even in the cooler climates like in the UK. So that's a bit of a backup plan for me really if we have a poor summer like we did last year. Please, I hope we don't have a summer like that again, that was awful. Sow them on heat mats, heated propagators, at home, grow lights, south facing windowsill. They need warmth to grow. So yeah, get them started in March. And also cucumbers as well. I grow this variety every single year. Mini Munch, lovely variety, very, very productive. March is a good time to be sowing your cucumbers. Get a 9cm pot and fill it with multi-purpose compost and start them off at home as well because they require warmth, just like the tomatoes and the peppers, and a south-facing windowsill or grow lights will be fine for those. And then after your last frost date, bring them down to your garden. Grow them outside if you want, but they will produce a better crop in a greenhouse or a polytunnel. Now in March you can also be sowing aubergine as well. I sowed these in January at home with the peppers and they're under the grow lights at the moment, and they're coming along pretty well. But if you want to sow them in March, go ahead. They do benefit from the warmth, just like the peppers though, so start them off at home. So we're going to go over the cold hardy crops now, which can be sown in March in an unheated greenhouse for a head start, or direct sown outside if your ground isn't frozen. So in March we can be sowing some cabbage. This is Golden Acre Primo 2, a lovely variety which I grow every year. I've already sown some of them actually, and they're actually coming along pretty nicely. Well, they've just started to pop up, which is a good sign. We can also be sowing our Brussels sprouts. I've got a variety called Brigitte. Some broccoli as well. You can sow some broccoli in the month of March, and you can be sowing your other brassicas as well, like your cauliflower, your kale and your kohlrabi as well. Get them sown in March. I like to sow them in module trays, and then when they start to get to a decent size, a few inches tall, with a couple of sets of true leaves, I will pot them on into 9cm pots, and then hopefully a few weeks after this, around April, May time, I'll have some lovely plants ready to be planted out into the raised beds. So March is a good one for your brassicas. They don't require too much warmth to germinate, so unheated greenhouse, or if you don't want to do this and you don't want to be potting them on and messing about, you can direct sow them outside. Just bear in mind they're going to take longer to germinate outside if you do this, and a light frost isn't going to damage them either. They are fairly frost tolerant and can tolerate them light frosts, so don't worry about that. Now March is a good month for sowing our salad crops as well. Salads do perform best in cooler weather, so you can be sowing them in March. I like to successionally sow these. I've already sown some actually in January, and they're just little seedlings at the moment, but lettuce can germinate in temperatures as low as 1 degree Celsius, so they have no problem growing in January there. But I might sow a few more in March for some successional sowings, so I've got a continuous crop throughout the growing season. In fact, there are many different veggies on here which you can successionally sow. The brassicas as well, which I mentioned, you can stagger your sowings with those as well to get a few crops during the growing season. If you sow some every month, you should be able to get a few different harvests. And more lettuce leaves here, rocket and spinach as well. I will sow these in modules in the greenhouse, 2 or 3 per module, and then I will plant the entire clump out into the raised beds. They grow quite well in clumps, spinach does. The rocket can just be direct sown outside. I really like lettuce, especially this packet here, because there are loads of different types in there. There's red leaf, butterhead, cos, iceberg, crisp head types, loads of different types of lettuce in there. It's a good economical packet. It only costs like £1.50 or something like that. £1.70 it says on the pack there, and you get hundreds of seeds per packet. In fact, no, 1,200 seeds per packet. So that is really, really good, because lettuce is expensive to buy in the supermarket, so it's well worth growing them yourself. Super easy as well. But as I mentioned before, cool weather crop. It does grow much better in the earlier part of the year and the later part of the year. It can be quite prone to bolting when it gets hot in the summer. So you may want to provide them with some shade if you are growing them through the summer. But through March, April and May, you shouldn't have an issue with this. And what I do is I grow them in my raised beds, and I'll just come along and pick them whenever I need them through March, April, May and into June, and then it starts to get quite warm, so you may want to provide some shade for them. Now you may have already sown your onions from seed or from sets. I've already sown a lot of my onions. I sowed them on Boxing Day. I've brought some of them down to the greenhouse now. Most of them are at home under the grow lights though, but I've just potted a few on there. These are red onions, so you can grow them from seeds, which I've done, or you can grow them from sets. I've got some from sets over here which my mum's growing. My mum's growing onions from sets this year, and she's got about 100 of them, and they're all looking pretty well at the moment. So March is a good time to be sowing your onion seeds and onion sets as well. It's not too late. I would say if you're up for a challenge and you enjoy the process of watching something grow from a seed to a crop ready to harvest, and you want to do things a bit cheaper, and you want more options for varieties, because there are more options for varieties with seed, then grow onions from seed if you want. Typically they're more expensive to buy them from sets because they're already about a year old. They are easier to grow though. You will have a crop a good few weeks earlier than growing them from seed, and you don't have to start them as early really typically. But they are more prone to bolting because they've already had a bit of growth on them. They're already an established plant. But whichever you want to choose with your onions, seed or sets, start them off in March. Now, you can start them off in modules like I do in a greenhouse and then plant them out a bit later. Or you can just direct plant them outside in March as well. A close relative of the onion which you can be sowing in March is the leek. Leeks can be sown in March in the same way as the onions. You can direct sow them in your beds and leave them there temporarily and then transplant them later on when you get to about pencil thickness. Or you can just sow them in modules or in trays of compost and then plant them out a bit later. They are best planted deep though. Make a hole that's at least 6 inches deep and then pop the leek in. You want the leek to be buried deep because you want a nice branched stem, and you don't want to backfill the hole as well. You just want to water it because that soil will just naturally backfill over time anyway. You want the leek to be able to grow easily through that soil. If you backfill it straight away, the leek isn't going to be able to swell and grow as effectively. Now you can also be sowing some carrots in March as well. You can sow them in containers under cover for a bit of a head start, or you can sow them direct outside if you want. Carrots need a nice, loose, sandy soil that isn't too rich in organic matter, because if you've got a soil that's too heavy, the roots won't be able to grow through the soil easily. If you've got any large bits of stones in there, the carrot can start to fork. And if you've got a soil that's too rich, it can also start to grow root hairs, which will grow bigger, and then you'll end up with a mangly carrot like that, which isn't very good. You want a nice straight carrot. I'm going to be sowing some early Nance and sweet candle carrots in March. I'm just going to direct sow them in my raised beds outside. They may take a long time to germinate because things can still be quite cold in March, but they will germinate eventually, and I may actually sow some undercover as well in a couple of 30-litre buckets, which I did last year, and I got some really nice baby carrots through the spring. They were lovely. And you can also be sowing some parsnips in March as well. I found that with parsnips, they do take a long time to germinate. They can take 4 or 5 weeks to germinate if the soil is cold in March. So what I do is, I get a Tupperware tub with some damp paper towel in it, and then I will just sprinkle the seeds over the damp paper towel. I'll stick it in a Ziploc bag, or I'll cling film it, and then I will stick it in my boiler cupboard at home, and within a few days they will start to produce little roots. They will start to sprout. This method is known as chitting. That's what it's often called. It's basically just the process of letting the seeds sprout before you plant it outside. This is often done with carrots as well, and you can do this with carrots if you want to, but I found that parsnips do take significantly longer to sprout. So in March you can get some parsnips sown direct outside. Now some more cold hardy crops which you can be sowing in March are beetroot. I've got some lovely orange beetroot here, and I've also got some bolt hardy beetroot, which is less prone to bolting than other varieties. You can get them sown in March in a greenhouse. You can sow them in modules if you want, which I've actually done here, and they're just starting to pop up now. I sowed these back half of January, and they're just starting to pop up now. They are taking a while, but it has been pretty chilly. Hopefully around mid to late March, maybe into April, I will plant these outside in my raised bed. I'll just pop out the entire clump, and then when they get to a decent size, I will pick 1 or 2 beetroot from each clump, and then I will let the remaining beetroot grow to a nice big size. You can do this, or you can just direct sow them outside in March just fine. Now, March is a good time to be planting your potatoes as well. I'm going to be planting my potatoes around the end of March. I've laid them out in trays here to start chitting or producing sprouts. Some of them have already started to produce little sprouts there. But this is often done around 6 weeks before you plant them, because letting them produce sprouts before you plant them is said to give you a good few weeks head start, and you can plant them mid to late March. They are not frost hardy though. A frost will take the foliage out, so make sure you protect them from the frost when you're sowing them in March. If they are taken back by a bit of frost though, you'll find that they will recover, they will start to regrow again, but this will set you back a little bit. So if you're due a frost, use some horticultural fleece or straw, or if you're growing them in containers, keep them in your greenhouse whilst there's a frost forecast. Now we're going to go over some flowers which you can be sowing in March. It's not just about the vegetables. First one is cornflowers. I'm going to be sowing some of these in March for some lovely blooms in the summer months. These are really good for the bees and the butterflies, and they look absolutely brilliant in the garden. I'm also going to be sowing some of these lupins as well. Quite a nice flower to have in the garden, a classic cottage garden flower, and they will grow back every year as well because they are a perennial. Now you can be sowing some petunias in March as well. I love my petunias, a really good flower for the summer, and these are best sown at home on a bright sunny windowsill or grow lights because they do require warmth to get going, and they're not frost hardy either. And what I do with my petunias is I get a tray and then I'll sieve some compost onto it so it's nice and fine, and then I will sow my seeds on top of the surface of the soil. I will wet it and then stick a dome over the top to keep the humidity and keep them seeds moist. I don't cover the petunia seeds with any compost, I just lay them on the top of the soil because they're such small seeds. Literally, if you breathe too heavily, they'll just blow out of your hand and you'll end up sowing seeds everywhere. Petunias are really small. And marigolds can be sown in March as well, a good companion plant for tomatoes. I'm going to be sowing some of those in March to grow alongside the tomatoes to keep some of the pests away. And they look brilliant alongside the tomatoes as well. They really do add a good punch of orange colour amongst the tomatoes. Sow some marigolds at home in trays of compost or in modules. Sow them about 1 centimetre deep and bring them down to the garden after your last frost date. And sweet peas as well. Some of you may have already sown your sweet peas. I already sowed them in January and they're over here doing pretty well. They've just started to come up now. They're not very big yet, but I'm sure they'll be romping away nicely through March and April, given that we have some good sunny weather, hopefully, fingers crossed. And they'll be planted outside around April, May time, given that we have some good weather and if the plants grow nice and strong and healthy. You can sow them in root trainers like that, or in toilet roll tubes, or 9 centimetre pots. Sow 4 or 5 seeds per pot because they can grow in groups, and then plant the whole thing outside around a month or 2 later. And a flower which I'm growing quite a lot of this year, which is actually one of my favourite flowers to grow, and it was actually my late father's favourite flower to grow as well. It's been 10 years since he died this year. I want to plant quite a few of these sort of to remember him by, to sort of mark 10 years since he died, and those are sunflowers. Sunflowers are lovely in the garden. I love the tall varieties that tower above everything else. They really do add a unique look to any garden. They can grow at the back of a sunny border and they look brilliant, and they're really good for the bees as well. But I've got some interesting varieties here which I'm going to be growing this year. I've got this teddy bear sunflower here which I've sown. I've sown them at home somewhere warm. I've done them under my grow lights. I've also got Little Dorrit as well, which is a dwarf variety, a branching variety for picking. And I've also got some of these taller varieties as well. I've got Moonwalker, which is a tall variety which gives loads of these big stems. It just fires sunflowers out all over the place. And I've also sown a couple of other varieties, but I don't have the seed packets here. I've sown some Pike's Peak, which is a massive giant sunflower. And I've also sown just some of the standard giant single sunflowers as well. So plenty of sunflowers this year. I want to grow lots of them. Through my childhood, I used to enjoy growing them. I used to love watching them grow from a tiny little seed up to like a 7 or 8 foot high sunflower, and I always used to enjoy watching that process. I used to go outside every single day and see how tall it got. I'm going to have to find an effective slug control method with my sunflowers, because every single year I try growing them, they completely annihilate them. They just tear the plants in half. I'm going to be trying quite a few options for slug control this year with my sunflowers. I've got many different ideas, and I'll be sharing those on the channel as well, because we really do need to get around this slug problem with the sunflowers. I've found they target the sunflowers before anything else. I planted about 20 sunflowers last year, and I kid you not, we only had one produce a flower. It was that ridiculous. Anyway, sunflowers can be sown in March, and they are actually quite cold hardy. I found that you don't have to worry too much about your last frost day when it comes to planting them outside, actually. I've planted them outside in April and had some light frosts, and they've managed okay. They are quite hardy, so long as it isn't a deep frost that gets into like -5, -6, which will probably kill them off. But a light frost that's like 0 degrees, -1, maybe even -2, this should be okay from what I've found anyway. They do manage quite well in light frosts. Okay, so that was a few of the things. I say a few, quite a lot of them actually, but there are many more things than this which you can sow in March. But there's just too many to put into one video. I think this video is long enough, to be honest. But those are the things which I'm going to be sowing, and you might want to sow some of these as well. I hope I provided some good information for you guys, and I hope I managed to help some of you. Do let me know if you're sowing any of these crops in March. And if you think I've missed anything else off this list, then do let me know in the comments below. So that's all for now, guys. Happy growing, happy spring. I will see you in the next one.